Hello, good evening, and welcome to another program on Law and Order. The title of the program, as well as what we are going to discuss every week, is on some area of law or some area of order which we need to go through this society. Now, if you are a woman who's watching this, today's program is going to be very important to you because we're going to talk all about your rights. Now, you know, you come from a culture, if you are a Sri Lankan woman, that had women who were empowered for the 2000 years of history as we know it. We had 7 queens, not wives of kings, but queens themselves who were women in Sri Lanka, which means we had a society which was empowered. But something happened down the line after the invasions which happened from different countries from Europe for the past 500 years. But today, all that is the past. Our position is, are women in Sri Lanka empowered? Do they have the rights they deserve to have? And do they, in fact, need new rights to live an equal life with men as well as in other countries? Right. So to discuss all this and more in a legal perspective, as our program is Law and Order, I have a special guest as always, an expert. My guest today is Ambika Sathkunanathan. She's a commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka and qualified in many areas of law, including this area. Ambika, thank you very much for taking our invitation and coming to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. We love to have you. Women's rights. Obviously, anybody would ask you this obvious, broad-based question. What exactly is women's rights in the world?
Well, I think women's rights also, we recently on the 8th of March, we celebrated International Women's Day. And the whole purpose of having a day to commemorate or to focus on the rights of women is because not just in Sri Lanka, even globally, even in the most developed countries, you find that women are not on par with men.
Right.
In that in constitutions, in law, there is formal equality, but there is no substantive equality. So what do we mean by that? Every day, whether it's in the workplace or in the home, women suffer discrimination. They might suffer violence. They might suffer marginalization only for the reason that they are women, which is why, so for instance, even, and we must not always look at this as an issue that affects Sri Lanka only.
Right.
Even in other countries, even in, the West, developed countries, you find that there is a huge gap, for instance, in terms of wages, what women get paid and what men get paid. So when we talk about women's rights, what we're talking about is basically creating a society that is more equal, where people are not labeled on the basis of their gender or their sex, but treated in an equitable manner as equal citizens.
Right. So that's a broad-based answer. Now, what is the law in Sri Lanka governing women's rights? I know there is a constitutional provision which enables to make law that will uplift, if I may use that term, women, children and disabled people. Based on this, is there laws made specifically to empower and protect women? And what are they?
So as you rightly said, I mean, we have the Constitution. In the Constitution, we have the Fundamental Rights Chapter. And in the Fundamental Rights Chapter contains Article 12, which is very important because that is the equality provision that says that everyone is equal before the law and you cannot be discriminated on the grounds of sex, etc., on, religion, political opinion, etc. So that is a very important provision. And in addition to that, we also have other laws. For instance, we have the protection of women against violence, domestic violence. So we have specific laws that are geared to protect women in Sri Lanka, but often when you look at discrimination and equality, it's not just about the laws. You might have laws, but the question is, do you have implementation?
Right.
And if you don't, then what needs to be done?
Right.
To bring about implementation.
What are these laws, Ambika? What are the laws that have been made?
Well, one of them is, as I said, the prevention of domestic violence, right? And that, of course, once again, is a law that doesn't actually criminalize domestic violence, because in some countries they have criminalized the offense of domestic violence.
Right.
Whereas this law doesn't criminalize domestic violence. What it does is that it enables women who might be in a violent situation to get what are called protection orders.
Right.
They go before a judge, they can go themselves, they can, or policeman or even a lawyer can appear on their behalf, and you ask for a protection order. The protection order would prevent the person who is perpetrating the violence, for instance, from entering the home, or from coming within certain, few meters of the person, the victim, for example. So that is what this particular law does. But other than that, we also have on our statute book still laws that, for instance, discriminate against women.
Right. What are those laws?
The Land Development Ordinance, for instance, where we have been, and civil society and even the commission has been advocating for a long time, because there is discrimination between the male heirs and the female heirs. So there are laws, for instance, that do need to be changed, even in the formal sense, to bring about formal equality, in the law. But once you bring that, what do you need to do to ensure that women are able to actually enjoy those rights day to day in society?
So it's not a particular area, a law or a statute that needs to be determine the rights of women. It is what you are saying in the multiplicity of statutes and laws that are there. Each statute should make provision in a way that it won't discriminate women. That's what you're saying.
Of course, it shouldn't discriminate against women.
But as it is, the Land Development Ordinance and certain acts.
What
would be the other in your experience, how you have come across?
Other acts. One of them, of course, as I said, is the Land Development Ordinance. The other one is women also have been advocating for a long time to criminalize domestic violence. Because right now
how is the domestic violence law as it is now?
Because we don't have, now for instance, if a woman is subject to domestic violence, what you need to do is you need to, if you go and complain to the police and they arrest someone, you have to use the penal code, and one of the offences that already exist in the penal code, which are not geared to fit domestic violence, because domestic violence has certain elements. For instance, it is something where you have a certain relationship with the person who is perpetrating the violence. It takes place within a certain private domestic sphere. So the current law doesn't actually cater to that. In other countries, you have laws that not only criminalize domestic violence, but also provide to establish shelters for women who are suffering from violence, because you find in many instances women do not leave the home because they are not economically independent. They have nowhere to go. So in other countries, they make provision to establish shelters. The other thing is they might make it mandatory for instance, medical personnel who come across such women in hospital to report that to the police. So you would have a very holistic law. So currently what we have is a law that enables the judge to give a protection order, but that also is an order that can lapse after a certain period. So it's not a holistic law. Now, of course, recently we've made provision to in the local government, the law governing elections in the local government, to make provision for women, so that is a positive thing. Women have also been asking for that also in Parliament, because the political representation of women is very low in Sri Lanka, even in comparison to other South Asian countries.
I was told, I think even in Pakistan you get about 30% representation.
It's very high. Pakistan, India,
you said
Nepal.
About a holistic law not existing. What is a holistic law on that area? You said, what is domestic violence? What is a holistic law should encompass?
Yeah, but what a holistic law is, it's not just, it would look at not just the legal aspects of who has perpetrated the offense, and we arrest the person, we produce a person in court, we file a case against the person, but also about other social and economic factors that prevent women from leaving violent situations, and thereafter that prevent women from rebuilding their lives.
Right.
So that's what I said.
Such things should be cautioned to a domestic violence law?
In certain countries, it is.
Where you find this?
I mean, in many parts of the world. I mean, mostly it's in progressive and like you get in more developed countries, because also in our countries, what happens is when you talk about setting up shelters, etc., the question of resources comes up, and they say we do not have the resources to provide for this. But the question that I would ask is, in our budget, if we look, it's about responsible allocation of resources. And as a community and society, what are the issues that are important to us? Aren't women important? And, you know, the violence they suffer, do we not want to prevent that and support them? In which case, yes, we do need to allocate resources for that in our budget. So what we need is responsible and responsive allocation of resources by the state.
Right. Okay. So you say a holistic nature approach of domestic violence law has to be developed. Now, what would be the other areas that need urgent attention of change? I know that's a broad question, but you also brought in the fact that women are economically not independent, and the law plays a part too, definitely part they need to play to uplift that. Now, recently there were situations even in the West, even in a television station like BBC, that they found that the women were not paid equal for the same job. Is this factor in Sri Lanka, and is there no legal recourse for women to get equal pay or challenge that?
In Sri Lanka also, if we find that women's labor force participation, funny thing is, now if you for instance even take, let's say, the law faculty, right, you find that more than 50% of the students, I think maybe even close to 70-80% of the students are all women in the law faculty. But once they pass out and you look at practice, how many women are practicing? If you look at even criminal or civil practice, how many prominent women practitioners can you think of? You would be able to come up with very few. That is because after they pass out, after working for a few years, women tend to drop out. They tend to drop out because they have to deal with the double burden, which is the professional development, and then they also have to look after the home once they have children. So women's labor force participation is something that is very low in Sri Lanka. That is something we need to increase. And even in terms of wages, you find that there are discrepancies. For instance, in the agricultural sector, I think there is, close to about, last time I checked, about 800 rupee difference between what is the women are paid and what men are paid. So once again, we come back to this question of issue of substantive equality and discrimination. I think that is something we have to acknowledge.
Okay, if I may interrupt you for a second. Now, this thing what you told me just now about not being equally paid, is it because some statute or some kind of a law which has to say equal pay is necessary is not saying that, or is it something else?
I mean, you can bring about laws to say in all sectors, for particular laws that govern each sector, you can say, but also we must understand, for instance, the constitution, which applies to all state entities. Now, discrimination, for instance, if you are discriminated, Article 12 says that you are equal and you cannot be discriminated. So if you work in the state sector, you can use Article 12 to actually file a fundamental rights petition, or you could come and complain to the Human Rights Commission about discrimination. That is possible. But what I'm trying to get at is, it is not always about the law.
Yes.
It is about attitude.
Right.
And it is about social values.
Yes.
And how do we view women in society? I think it comes down to that. How do we socialize our children at home and in the classroom? So for instance, even at home, you find parents would treat their girl children differently to the boy children in terms of perhaps even the freedoms that they enjoy. So if you're a girl child, then you have to come back home by 6 o'clock, whereas if you're a boy child, then you're given more freedom. Girls are told to behave in a certain way, dress in a certain way. And if you're a boy, once again, you're said you can't, boys have to be tough, right? They can't cry. So we're socializing them in particular ways, which impacts also the way they behave and treat each other when they go out into society.
Right. That plus the factor you said, a woman will come to a position where she has to balance the children and the family and the career. Now, there when you look at that factor, you can't say that, you took the example of female lawyers, that the fact that they are dropping out of practice is not that they don't have equal opportunities, but they have other social responsibilities. So my question to you, coming back is that how can a law provide for this?
That's what I'm saying. A law can't always
can't
provide.
provide for this.
In some sectors, you might find that they don't have equal opportunity. In other sectors, you might find they have equal opportunity, but it might be slightly tougher for them, particularly the environment. Now, if you take, for instance, even politics, why do we not have women in positions of power within the political sphere? But in other cases, it's about social, it's about value. So, for instance, the double burden. In Sri Lanka, we assume that it's the woman who is solely responsible for looking after children. We believe that, looking after the home, housework, etc., completely depend that the woman is responsible. Whereas if there was more of an equal sharing of family and home responsibilities, then you would find women would have more opportunity to engage in the in employment and in the public sphere. So I think that is where the change of mindset comes about, or should come about.
Right. Isn't this the case in most countries, even in the West? Or what you are saying, has it been resolved successfully in any country by use of means of law or changes of attitude? Has it been done?
It is improving because now, for instance, in many countries in the West, whether it's in Scandinavian countries, etc., you find that they also give paternity leave.
Yes.
And they're increasing the paternity leave.
Yeah.
So there is no shame in that. Now, if you were to give paternity leave, men would be like, oh my God, I can't do that. Whereas they're quite proud of it because you have not devalued female labor.
Right.
Here, there is a devaluation in some sense about, housework, childcare, than about what you do in the public sphere. Whereas there, you don't have that devaluing. So men also feel very comfortable stepping up and say, okay, I'm going to go on paternity leave for 1 month or 3 months to look after that while my wife can go back to work. So that's what I said about changing mindsets. But and I think we need to, this we need to keep in mind, however many laws you bring, if you do not change the mindset, and this is where it's very important when you have awareness raising programs, for instance, we find they always target only women. You're telling women, these are your rights. If you're in a violent situation, this is what you need to do. If you're being sexually harassed, once again, there is a law in our penal code against sexual harassment. This is what you need to do. But you don't, these awareness raising programs are not involving the men and boys, because if the perpetrators are men and boys, then you need to include them in your awareness raising to change their attitude to women. How do they view women? So which is why it's very important. Family and schools are extremely important in this. They play a very important role in this, in changing attitudes.
Right. So as far as things are in Sri Lanka, there is no need of any change of law, as you said, for empowering.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
there are areas.
Yes, of course.
What areas do you see?
We do need to still bring about, so other than the two that I mentioned, we also have, currently, there are also other regulations, circulars, for instance, that require women who are going off as migrant workers to get a certification saying that they have, if they have children under 5, to certify and say that they have, made adequate provisions for the care of the child. But once again, now when you look at that, you view childcare to be solely the responsibility of the woman, which is why you're banning her, you're preventing her freedom of movement. If she cannot, she has to prove. So where is the equal share and responsibility of the other parent? Right? And also, once again, in a way, you're taking a protective attitude towards women, and as if you need to protect them rather than treating them as individuals who have agency and are able to make their own decisions. So that would be one in terms of that. And also,
have you the sexual harassment law in Sri Lanka?
Yes, we do have in the penal code there is, but but many women and even men or general public are actually not aware that sexual harassment is an offense. They're not aware of it. So there needs to be greater awareness. And also within workplaces. Now, this is one of the things I think women tend to talk about a lot. And also with this, we've had this whole Me Too movement where women are, women are talking about sexual harassment. So sexual harassment in the workplace, inequality, that is still a problem. Even where our labor laws are concerned, there are provisions that discriminate against women and treat them as beings who need to be protected. So, for instance, you know, in the hospitality industry, for instance, women can't work beyond a certain time. So, those are things that you can argue that they are in place to protect women, but women are also adults, right? And they should be given the right to choose the hours they work.
What about the fact that the government certainly recently released and retracted the fact that women can be used for selling alcohol, and they can, you know, that issue? What do you think of that issue?
Well, I would
the
say
relaxation, was it justified as far as
because the
women is
point is this,
concerned,
once
or the
again,
retraction was justified?
you know, you cannot, why would you prevent
Yes.
women from buying alcohol,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
In the sense of, you're saying, so then women have to be protected,
Yes.
they're not equal citizens.
Exactly.
There is a moral kind of decision that you're making
Yes, yes.
on their behalf. So
Yes.
our point is, it actually, you know, women need to be treated as equals as per the constitution of Sri Lanka.
So that
would be my-
relaxation was justified in the eyes, in the broader sense.
because it's not about, it's the moral decision you're making
Yeah.
rather than a legal decision.
Exactly.
Because the legal decision says they have to be treated equally. And
Equally.
anyway, I mean, I think there are some women who filed a fundamental rights petition challenging that.
Yeah. Challenging the retraction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, better. to
It's
not
still
to-
in discussion.
I think that's still, yeah,
So,
so-
about the Me Too movement, you just touched upon. Now, when you analyze the whole thing, it was shelved again in the West against people in the media largely, and people in film industry and politicians.
And now also tech.
Tech
Silicon Valley
industries,
is,
yeah.
yes.
The allegations were in the crux was not sexual harassment or rape or anything like that. It was sexual abuse. So the other side of the coin, when the people who are defending also found that these are people, the people who come up, and it's not every woman who's in the media or Hollywood or anybody said that, they subjugate themselves to any level to come to get that job or get that position, and when they come to a position, they become ladies, and all these things are coming up. This is one school of thought that was found out. This was found. What is your opinion on that? Aren't there women who are abusing that, like in that sense, also at the same time, because there was, like you said in the whole discussion, there was leverage and opportunity for men to abuse the situation. What is the protective methods you should put in place in hiring women for jobs and works to avoid and end this kind of a thing?
Well, I mean, I think there's also
two-pronged
misunderstanding
question,
about what sexual harassment is. I mean, part of it was sexual harassment, some of it was abuse, because sexual harassment is also about power disparity.
Yeah.
It's about abusing a position of power. Sexual harassment is also about quid pro quo. So, for instance, if you do this for me, then you will get the job. So I think we must understand, I mean, have a kind of a broader understanding
Yes.
of what sexual harassment is. Once again, I mean, I would, very strongly disagree with you that, women use this and they use that to get the job, and thereafter they're talking about it.
I'm not saying every woman.
Yeah.
In the discussion
my
they have found
question-
some people
my
did that.
question is,
Yeah.
why should they, even that first point of the woman being forced to be in a position to choose to do that, why should she be in that position?
Right.
So that the man has already started to abuse his position of power to put that woman in
Right.
that position. If at all, he should look at the qualifications, if it is a job, and say whether you qualify or not, and follow due process, right?
Right.
So therefore, the blame should firmly be placed there, rather than saying, oh, but the woman took the opportunity.
Yes.
Why did the man start that then?
Right.
So, so I would say what we need once again, and also women find when they even complain about sexual harassment in the workplace, most often they're not taken seriously. Many workplaces don't have proper processes to deal with complaints that also make the complainant feel secure. Sometimes they're afraid of reprisals, because if the person happens to be someone of a higher position, a boss, they're afraid that might lead in them losing their job if they complain against the boss. So I think a lot needs to be done internally to set up processes that actually protect the person. I'm not saying you should disregard due process, right? Any allegation should be treated as an allegation and inquired into, but you must also make the victim or the alleged victim feel secure.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying this is not happening because they are left it to the employers and the institutions to do it. So there should be one universal law that or regulations made which every institution should adopt. Isn't that a better solution?
I mean, we do
with
have, for
regard to-
instance, we have that criminal offence. So, for instance, in India, there was a Vishaka judgment which actually set out processes to follow in terms of sexual harassment. Here, I know the Employers Federation has been trying to put in place, within the private sector. So I think, yes, general standards are always good. But so in that sense, yes, policy, procedure, etc., if we could come up with that, that is well and good. But once again, as I said, it comes back to the mindset, the culture, and how do you view women.
Ambika, Sathkunanathan, thank you very much for joining us today and for those very valuable thoughts. And thank you again for joining Law and Order.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's
Thank
Law
you.
and Order for today. We'll join you next week at the same time with another program on Law and Order. Enjoy the rest of the programming on Channel I. If you miss our programs, go to our website, channeli.lk, pick the Law and Order from drop-down menu, and you can watch our programs all over again. I'll see you next week. Good night and have a good weekend.